The galaxy had seen wars that swallowed star systems. It had seen civilizations rise from stone tools to faster-than-light travel in the span of 10,000 years. It had seen creatures with 8 brains and creatures with no eyes and creatures that communicated entirely through the color of their skin. The galaxy thought it had seen everything. Then it met humans. The announcement came quietly. The Galactic Academic Consortium sent a single message to Earth on a Tuesday morning. Most humans did not notice because there was a football match happening and the internet was busy. The message said that the consortium was opening its most prestigious university to 3 human students as part of a new exchange program. The university was called the Valorath Prime Institute of Sciences. It was not on a planet. It was a station so large that it had its own weather system and its own gravity rings and its own small forest in the recreational sector. Over 200 species studied there. It was the kind of place that changed the course of civilizations. The humans who were selected did not fully understand any of that. They were just excited to go to space. Marcus Hale was 22 years old when he got the letter. He was sitting in a small apartment eating instant noodles and watching a documentary about bears when his phone buzzed. He read the message 3 times. Then he finished his noodles. Then he called his mother. His mother cried. Marcus told her it was not a big deal. He was lying, but he did not know it yet. Marcus was not the smartest of the 3 selected humans. He was not the most academically decorated. What he was a young man who had grown up hiking through mountain ranges for fun, who had once spent 9 days alone in a forest as part of a wilderness survival program, who had broken his arm at age 14 falling from a tree and had walked 2 kilometers to the nearest road before anyone found him, and who described all of these experiences in his application essay as ordinary life. The selection committee at the consortium had read that essay very carefully. Professor Doesn't Call, a Valori academic with 4 centuries of experience and 2 of the most respected minds in xenobiology, had read that essay 4 times and then sat in silence for a long while. She had approved his application personally. The station was 6 weeks of travel from Earth by human ship. When Marcus arrived, he had 2 bags, a jacket that was too thin for the recycled air of the docking corridor, and a protein bar he was still eating. The docking hall was enormous. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into pale artificial light. Creatures of every imaginable shape moved through the hall, some floating, some crawling, some walking on more legs than Marcus could count in a glance. The air smelled strange. Not bad. Just deeply and completely alien. Marcus stopped walking and looked around for a long moment. Then he put the rest of the protein bar in his jacket pocket and kept walking. Coordinator Reen was waiting for him at the registration desk. Reen was a favori, which meant that Reen had a narrow body, like a ribbon of pale blue silk and 3 pairs of arms and large golden eyes that blinked sideways. Reen had been assigned specifically to manage the human students during their time at the Institute. It was considered a prestigious posting. Reen had prepared extensively. Reen had read every available paper on human biology. Reen had a list of emergency medical contacts. Reen had a contingency plan for 17 different scenarios. Reen had not prepared for Marcus to look at the registration desk and say, "Cool place? Is that a tree over there? Why does the tree have 4 trunks?" Reen blinked sideways 3 times, which was the favori equivalent of complete bewilderment. Orientation was held in a large circular hall with tiered seating. Marcus sat next to his assigned academic partner, who was a student named Virath. Virath was Salvari, which meant 6 limbs, a body covered in fine dark bristles, large compound eyes, and antennae that moved constantly and expressively the way human eyebrows move. Virath was one of the top 3 students in the xenobiology program. Virath was also extremely uncomfortable sitting next to Marcus, but was trying very hard not to show it because Virath had manners. The orientation speaker was a tall green-gray Valori administrator, who spoke for 40 minutes about the history and values of the Institute. Marcus listened. He took notes. He was a good student when he applied himself. At some point, the speaker asked the assembled new students to share one fact about their homeworld as an icebreaker exercise. Most students said things like, "My world has 3 moons," or "My species developed agriculture 12,000 years ago." One student from the aquatic Relvany said that their ocean covered 94% of their planet, and the audience murmured with interest. Then it was Marcus's turn. He thought for a second and said that back home he had once hiked through a blizzard for 3 days to reach a mountain summit because the weather closed in on the second day, and turning back would have taken just as long as finishing. He said it matter-of-factly, the way someone might mention they had once taken a long bus ride. The hall went quiet. Not politely quiet, not impressed quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when something deeply wrong has entered a room and everyone is waiting to understand what it is. Virith's antennae pressed flat against the top of Virith's head. Flat antennae in Selvari body language meant one thing. It meant fear. Virith slowly turned and looked at Marcus with compound eyes that reflected the light in 17 tiny fractured images. Marcus noticed and smiled. "It was actually pretty beautiful up there," he said. "The ice crystals in a blizzard at altitude catch the light in this specific way. I have photos if you want." Virith did not want photos. Virith wanted to send a message to Coordinator Reen. Virith sent a message to Coordinator Reen. The message said that the human student appeared to have survived a weather event that would have killed any known enrolled species within hours, and was describing it as recreation. Coordinator Reen received the message and added a note to the first of what would become a very long series of wellness reports filed on Marcus Hale after orientation. Marcus found a window that looked out into open space. He stood there for a while with his hands in his jacket pockets looking at the stars. They were different stars than the ones above his hometown. The patterns were completely wrong, and the darkness between them was the same. He felt something he could not quite name. Not homesickness. Not fear. Something more like the feeling at the edge of a very high mountain before the descent. Something that was almost but not quite afraid. He pulled the rest of his protein bar out of his pocket and finished it. Somewhere behind him, Coordinator Reen was filing the wellness report and already hoping very hard that the rest of the year would be uneventful. It would not be uneventful. Nothing involving a human ever was. 3 weeks into the semester, Marcus Hale had already become something of a quiet legend on campus. Not because he had done anything dramatic. He had not. He had gone to classes and taken notes and asked questions that his professors found either very intelligent or very strange, depending on the professor. He had eaten in the common hall and tried food from 6 different species stalls and described most of it as interesting. He had gotten lost twice in the residential corridors because the station's internal layout was designed around Valori spatial logic, which was 4-dimensional in a way that made human brains briefly glitch. He had laughed both times he got lost, which the Selvari students observing him found deeply unnerving. Virith had filed 2 wellness reports. The third one was coming. It happened on a Thursday, which meant nothing to most species on the station. But Marcus still thought of Thursdays as slightly worse than other days from a habit picked up in childhood. The xenobiology class was scheduled for a practical session in Laboratory 7, which was on the 14th research floor. Laboratory 7 was a high-containment environment used for handling biological specimens from environments too hostile for open study. The walls were thick. The seals were strong. The safety protocols were 60 pages long and took 40 minutes to review before every session. Marcus had read all 60 pages the night before. While eating crackers, the session was a standard simulation exercise. Students were to observe specimens of Veth spore colonies through the containment viewing panel and record behavioral data. Veth spores were a Class 3 biological hazard, which in the consortium's classification system meant lethal to most carbon-based life forms on contact with exposed tissue. They looked like ordinary dust floating in a pale yellow cloud. They were not ordinary dust. They carried an enzyme complex on their surface that dissolved the cellular membrane of most known biological organisms with remarkable speed. The consortium had a phrase for what happened when a living creature was exposed to an uncontrolled spore cloud. The phrase was rapid and irreversible systemic failure. The phrase meant death in under 4 minutes. Every student in Laboratory 7 understood this. Every student arrived suited. The emergency biosuits issued by the Institute were full seal with independent atmospheric supply. They were the best protective equipment available. They were rated for full Class 3 exposure for up to 2 hours. The malfunction happened 11 minutes into the session. Nobody knew exactly why. The investigation afterward found a microfracture in the secondary containment coupling that had gone undetected through 3 maintenance cycles. What it meant in practice was that the containment seal on specimen case 4 failed without warning. There was a soft sound like a breath. Then the pale yellow cloud was in the room. The emergency alarm was a single high tone that hit every species auditory range simultaneously. Every alien student in Lab 7 moved within 1 second. Emergency biosuit protocols sealed automatically. The students moved toward the exit in an orderly and rapid evacuation. The lab's automated systems began emergency flush procedures. The internal doors sealed. Everything happened the way it was supposed to happen, except for 4 seconds. Marcus's suit was a human-adapted model. It was excellent equipment. It was also slightly different in its calibration sequence because human physiology. Data had only been integrated into the suit design 3 months earlier, and one parameter in the autoseal initialization was 0.4 seconds slower than the standard model across every activation step. 4 steps, 4 times 0.4 seconds. 1.6 seconds of total delay in each step, and the steps ran in sequence. The cloud reached him before the suit sealed, his left forearm. Just his left forearm from the wrist to halfway up toward the elbow. The cloud touched him there for approximately 3 seconds before the suit sealed completely, and the emergency flush began removing the spores from the air. 3 seconds of direct dermal contact with a Class 3 biological hazard. Virus saw it happen from behind the sealed exit door. Every alien student saw it happen. They stood on the other side of the thick, transparent barrier and watched, and none of them moved because there was nothing to move toward. The lab's medical AI ran its assessment in real time. The screen on the wall beside the exit door showed the probability calculation updating as it processed the exposure. Data, 97.4% fatality likelihood for the exposed organism. Vireth's antennae were completely flat. The Relvany student beside Vireth made a sound that, in their language, was a mourning tone. 2 students near the back turned away. Coordinator Ring, who had been monitoring all practical sessions, remotely received the alert, and felt something that the Favory described as cold weight in the chest. Reem began the notification protocol for contacting Earth's embassy. Inside the lab, Marcus looked at his arm. He tilted his head slightly. He looked the way a person looks when they notice something unexpected on their shoe. He scratched his forearm through the suit fabric because it was sealed now and he could not reach it directly. He made a small sound that the suit transmitted clearly to everyone on the other side of the door. He said, itchy, is this gonna be a problem?" Nobody answered him for a long moment. Then the medical team arrived with full hazard equipment and entered the lab through the secondary seal corridor and began their assessment. They scanned his forearm. They took surface samples. They ran 3 different biological analysis cycles because the first 2 results came back and the team lead reran them because she believed her. Equipment was malfunctioning. The Veth spores were dying on contact with his skin. Not slowly, not being neutralized by some external treatment, dying on their own. The enzyme complex that dissolved cellular membranes in every tested species was encountering Marcus Hale's immune system and losing. His body was producing a response so fast and so varied that the spores had no mechanism to outpace it. His skin showed mild inflammation, a slight redness. The kind of thing that happens when a person touches a plant they are mildly allergic to. The medical team lead a Valori doctor with 300 years of experience stood very still for a moment after reading the results. Then she gave Marcus an antihistamine and told him he could return to class. Marcus asked if he could finish recording his lab notes first, because he had been halfway through the behavioral data entry when the alarm went off. The Valori doctor said yes in a voice that was almost entirely without sound. On the other side of the door, Virith had not moved. Virith was still standing at the glass. The morning tone from the Relvany student had stopped because the Relvany student had seen that Marcus was still standing and had not known what sound to make about that. Coordinator Reen canceled the embassy notification and sat down and did not move for 4 minutes. Marcus came out of the lab with his notebook under his arm and his suit partially unsealed at the collar. He looked at the group of alien students standing in the corridor staring at him. He looked at Virith. He looked at the door behind them and then back at his colleagues. Did everyone else get out okay? He asked. Virith's antennae moved slowly upward from flat position. That movement in Salvari body language meant something that did not have a direct translation. The closest human equivalent was the feeling of watching something impossible happen and not yet having the words for it. You should be dead, Virith said. The translator rendered the Salvari syllables into flat, simple words. But even through the translation, the sound of it was something like awe and something like terror and something in between that had no name in either language. Marcus looked at his arm. The redness was already fading. I've had worse, he said. That night Virith filed the third wellness report. It was the longest one yet. At the bottom, where the form asked for additional observations, Virith wrote one sentence. It said, I do not think the human knows how dangerous he is. Word moved fast on a station with 200 species and one very large common hall. By the morning after the lab incident, every student on the residential floors had heard something about the human. The story changed shape as it traveled the way stories always do. Some versions said Marcus had walked through the spore cloud on purpose. Some said he had laughed. One version said he had eaten some of the spores, which was not true, but which several Salvari students found entirely believable given everything else. By the end of the week, the story had reached the administrative levels and 3 separate department heads had quietly requested access to the medical report. Professor Dozenthal had requested access to the medical report the same morning it was filed. She had read it twice over morning tea, and then she had opened a new research document and begun typing notes. She would spend the next several months expanding into something much larger. Marcus did not notice any of this. He went to class. He noticed that people looked at him differently. He assumed it was because he was the only human on campus, which was true and was part of it, but was not most of it. He sat next to Virith in every class because Virith was his academic partner, and Virith sat next to him because they had agreed to it, and because Virith was beginning to find that the discomfort of sitting next to the human was being slowly replaced by something more complicated, curiosity, a kind of reluctant fascination, the way you might feel watching a fire from close enough to feel the heat but far enough to be safe. Virith was not entirely sure they were safe, but they kept sitting there. The second incident happened on a Tuesday at the Common Hall food quarter. The food quarter had stations from 40 different worlds. Some of it was nutritionally neutral across species, meaning anyone could eat it safely. Some of it was species-specific and labeled clearly. The labels were in 12 languages plus pictographic symbols that indicated toxicity levels. Marcus had been navigating the hall fine for weeks. He read the labels. He was careful. Then he found an unlabeled station. It was a small cart operated by a Drovani student, selling home-prepared food from a region of their world that produced extremely spiced cuisine. The Drovani had forgotten to put up the toxicity marker because they did not think of their food as toxic the way a human might not think to warn someone that coffee is bitter. The particular compound in the dish, called Virac paste, was a naturally occurring alkaloid that in concentrations above a certain threshold caused cellular disruption in most humanoid digestive systems. The concentration in Varak paste was well above that threshold. For a Drovani, it was a light snack. For anyone else, it was a medical event. Marcus tried a small spoonful because it smelled interesting. He made a face. Not a bad face. The face of someone encountering something genuinely surprising on the tongue. He said it tasted like hot sauce but wrong. He said there was a kind of burning that came slightly late, like it was thinking about it first. He bought a full bowl. He ate the whole bowl. He thanked the Drovani student who was staring at him with an expression that the translator could not help with because the Drovani did not have a word for what they were feeling. Virith arrived at the table 7 minutes later and found Marcus finishing the last of the paste and reading notes on a tablet. Virith looked at the bowl. Virith knew what Varak paste was because Virith had once attended a Drovani cultural event and had read the safety material provided beforehand. Virith sat down very carefully and said nothing for a moment. Then Virith said, "How are you feeling?" Marcus said, "Good, slightly warm." That was actually pretty good once you get past the initial confusion. He looked up. "You want to try some?" "I can get more." Virith declined. The fourth wellness report was sent that evening. The third incident was different from the others. The others had been accidental. The third incident was entirely voluntary, which made it somehow worse. The Institute had a gravitational athletics program. It was an elective open to all enrolled species, and it was designed primarily for students from high-gravity worlds. The exercises involved resistance training and movement disciplines at gravity levels, significantly above the station's standard setting. The standard setting was calibrated for the most common enrolled species. The high-gravity athletic floor ran at 2.5 times that. It was considered safe for the species it was designed for. It was not designed for humans. There was no specific rule against humans using it, because nobody had thought to write that rule because no human had ever been enrolled at the Institute before. Marcus found the athletic floor on a Wednesday and went in. He lasted 40 minutes before he pulled something in his left shoulder. He knew immediately that he had pulled it because he had pulled the same muscle twice before doing exactly this kind of training back on Earth, and the feeling was specific and familiar. He stopped the movement that caused it. He stood still for a moment. He rotated the shoulder slowly through its range. He winced once. He tore a strip from the hem of his training shirt and fashioned it into a rough compression wrap around the joint. Then he kept going for another 20 minutes with modified movements that did not use that shoulder. 3 Thavari students who were there for their own training session had stopped their own exercises to watch. The Thavari were a high-gravity species. They were larger than most enrolled students and considerably denser in their musculature. They understood hard physical training in a way few species did. They watched Marcus wrap his own injury with a torn piece of cloth and continue, and the oldest of the 3 said something quietly to the others in their language that the translator in Marcus's ear rendered as approximately, "This creature does not know how to stop." It was not said with contempt. It was said with the particular kind of respect that only comes from one tough thing recognizing another tough thing. Marcus noticed them watching on his way out and nodded. They nodded back. Something passed between them that did not need translating. The fourth incident happened during the field study trip to the station's nature reserve. The reserve was a carefully maintained section of genuine wilderness, occupying 12 square kilometers inside a sealed environmental dome. It contained specimens of flora and fauna from a dozen worlds kept in separated biome sections. Students walked designated paths with study equipment. The paths were clear and marked and maintained. Marcus stepped off the path to get a closer look at a root formation he found interesting. He fell into a small rock gully hidden behind the root system. He fell less than 2 meters. When he stood up, his left shin had a deep gash running from just below the knee to halfway down the calf. The rock edge had been sharp. The wound was long and it bled immediately, and it bled well. Virith was the first to reach him. Virith's bioscanner was already out and already reading, and the display was showing a Category 2 trauma assessment. Category 2 meant significant tissue disruption requiring immediate medical intervention. Category 2 meant stop moving and wait for proper treatment. Marcus pressed his hand over the wound. He held it there for about 30 seconds with his eyes closed and the expression of someone doing arithmetic. Then he took his hand away and looked at it. Still bleeding, but less. He looked around and found a food packaging wrapper in his jacket pocket from a nutrition stick he had eaten on the walk-in. It was not sterile. It was not ideal. He folded it into a rough pad and pressed it against the wound and held it there while he stood up. "Just a scratch," he said. Virith's antennae moved in a way that suggested profound internal conflict. "That is not a scratch," Virith said. "That is a Category 2 trauma. You need surgical closure and antiseptic treatment and possibly vascular." "I've had worse," Marcus said. He found a strip of the synthetic cord he kept on his bag strap and tied the wrapper pad in place. He tested weight on the leg. He nodded once. "Walk me to the medical bay if you're worried," he said. "But I want to finish recording that root formation first. The growth pattern is actually really unusual." Virith stared at him through compound eyes that reflected Marcus in 17 small images. "You," Virith said slowly, "are the strangest creature I have ever encountered." Marcus looked up from his notebook. He smiled. It was a real smile. The kind that reaches the eyes. "Most people from home would say that's a low bar," he said. "You should meet my cousin." They walked to the medical bay together. Marcus took notes on the root formation on the way. Virith walked beside him, saying nothing because Virith had run out of words for this. That night Virith did not file a wellness report. Instead, Virith sat at the desk in their room for a long time and looked at the wall. Virith had been afraid of Marcus in the beginning. Everyone had been afraid of him in the beginning. But something had shifted in that gully. Something about the way Marcus had looked at the wound, not with fear, but with the patient, calculating expression of someone who had seen this before and knew what to do. Virith thought about what Marcus had said weeks ago after orientation. About Earth, about how everything there was trying to kill you and you just kept going. Virith thought that was either the saddest thing or the most remarkable thing they had ever heard. They were beginning to think it might be both. The Soroth Conference was held once every 4 years. It was the most important academic gathering in the known galaxy. 40 civilizations sent delegates. The best researchers from 100 worlds presented work that would shape science and policy and medicine for the next generation. It was held at the Valorith Prime Institute, because the institute was considered neutral ground and because its facilities were the finest available. The station buzzed with a different kind of energy during conference week. The corridors were fuller. The common areas were louder. Even the recycled air seemed to carry a charge. Marcus found it interesting. He attended 2 open public lectures and took 8 pages of notes. He had lunch with Virith in the common hall, and they talked about a paper one of the visiting researchers had presented on bioluminescent communication in deep ocean species. It was a good day. A normal day. Then the alarm sounded. It was a different alarm from the one in Lab 7. That alarm had been biological. This one was structural. A low, sustained tone that resonated through the walls of the station itself and carried with it a kind of weight. Structural alarms meant something was wrong with the station. The station was enormous and maintained by some of the finest engineering systems in the galaxy, and structural alarms were extremely rare. This one was in sub-level corridor. 9 of the lower academic ring, Marcus and Virith, were on the upper recreational level when it happened. They felt the vibration through the floor before they heard the alarm. Marcus looked down at his feet. Virith looked at Marcus looking at his feet. Then the alarm tone started and the station's emergency system came to life on every display surface. Sub-level 9. Structural breach. Atmospheric failure in progress. 3 conference delegates and a group of 8 students trapped behind the secondary seal. Emergency automated repair system engaged. Estimated repair time? 11 minutes, the problem was explained in the next line of the emergency broadcast. The automated repair system needed to physically reset the primary pressure coupling in Section 9C. The coupling was a manual mechanism because the designers had correctly identified that purely automated systems could fail in cascade scenarios. A physical reset required someone to hold the coupling in its correct position while the automated system cycled through its restart sequence. 11 minutes of holding. The secondary complication was the atmosphere in Section 9C. The breach had pulled in gases from the maintenance conduit running alongside the corridor. The maintenance conduit served the biological research labs above it. The atmospheric mix in 9C now included compounds from 3 different research environments. The compound analysis was already running on the emergency broadcast screen. Marcus read the list. He did not know the names of most of the compounds, but the hazard ratings were in standard symbols that all enrolled. Students had been taught to read in their first week. Every compound on that list had a red hazard symbol next to it. Every red hazard symbol was rated toxic to all known enrolled species. The emergency response team arrived at the outer seal of Section 9C within 4 minutes. They were the best team on the station. They had the best equipment. They stood at the outer seal and looked at the atmospheric analysis and ran through their available options with the speed and precision of trained professionals and arrived at the same answer every time. There was no combination of available protective equipment rated for simultaneous exposure to all 3 of those compound groups. No full seal suit could handle all 3. Every suit in inventory was rated for 2 out of 3 at most. Going in meant exposure. Exposure to that mix meant the word the consortium used for it, which was the phrase rapid and irreversible systemic failure. The delegates and students behind the secondary seal had about 12 minutes of trapped breathable atmosphere remaining. The coupling could not hold itself. The automated system could not cycle without the manual reset. 11 minutes of holding required someone inside the corridor. The response team leader, a tall Valori male with 40 years of emergency experience, looked at the atmospheric analysis and then looked at his team, and no one moved because moving meant dying, and they were trained and brave, but they were also biological, and the numbers were the numbers. Marcus had followed the emergency routing with Veroth at his side. He had read the broadcast screens at every junction. He had the atmospheric compound list in his memory now, and he was standing at the edge of the response team's outer perimeter looking at the seal door, and doing what he had been observed doing 3 times before. The patient calculating expression. The arithmetic behind the eyes. He thought about the Veth spores on his forearm. He thought about the Varak paste. He thought about his immune system, which had spent 22 years being hardened by everything a planet 4 billion years old had developed to make living things stronger or kill them trying. He thought about the compound list. He did not know for certain. He could not know for certain. But he looked at those 3 compound groups and thought about what he was made of and made a calculation that was not really a calculation. It was something older than math. He stepped forward to the response team leader. "Those compounds," he said quietly. "Can I see the full molecular breakdown?" The team leader looked at him. Then the team leader showed him the screen because there was no reason not to. And the human was not going to be able to do anything with the information anyway. Marcus read it. He was quiet for about 15 seconds. "None of these are things my biology has an analog for on Earth," he said. "But that first group, the base compound there, that's a fatty acid derivative. My immune system handles fatty acid variants. The second group is enzyme-based. I survived Veth spores." He paused. "The third group I don't know, but I ran through compound C-class industrial exposure twice doing hazardous waste cleanup summer work after first-year university. And I'm still here." The team leader stared at him. "I am not asking your permission," Marcus said. And he said it without aggression. He said it the same way you would state that the sky was a particular color. "Just a fact. I'm telling you what I'm going To do so, you can have the medical team ready when I come. Out, Coordinator Reen arrive. At the perimeter exactly 1 second after Marcus had already taken a partial oxygen rebreather from the emergency supply rack and was checking its seal. Reen made a sound that had no translation. Then Reen moved toward Marcus and Marcus looked at Reen with an expression that was patient and kind and completely immovable. There are 11 people in there, Marcus said, and I'm the only one here who might come back out. Reen stopped. Marcus put the rebreather on. He walked to the seal door. The response team opened it because the team leader had made a decision in a moment that would stay with them for the rest of their career. The door opened. Marcus walked through. The door sealed behind him. The security feed showed him moving through the corridor in the yellow-gray haze of the compromised atmosphere. He found the coupling. He had read the schematic on the emergency broadcast. He knew what he was looking for. He wrapped both hands around the coupling mechanism and planted his feet against the floor and held it in the correct position, and the automated system recognized the manual input and began its restart. Cycle. 11 minutes. The corridor filled slowly. The compound mix thickened in the air. Marcus breathed through the rebreather. The rebreather covered his mouth and nose and gave him clean oxygen, but it did not cover his skin. The compounds touched him through his clothes and through every exposed surface, and Marcus felt it. He felt it the way he had felt the spores, and the way he had felt the cold of the blizzard, and the way he had felt the rock in his shin. It was real, and it was not nothing. His hands hurt where they gripped the coupling. The cut on his palm from the coupling's edge bled slowly. He stood there. 4 minutes. In the security feed caught something that would later be shown at the council hearing without commentary, because no commentary was needed. It showed Marcus standing alone in a yellow-gray haze, holding a metal coupling with bleeding hands. It showed his shoulders rise and fall in a slow breath. It showed him tilt his head back slightly for a moment, eyes closed. And then it showed the thing that the Valori doctor who reviewed the footage described as the most distinctly human thing she had ever observed in 400 years of life. He was humming. Virith was watching. The security feed at the perimeter. Virith's antennae were flat. Virith had not moved. Virith was doing something that Selvari rarely did, which was simply feeling something too large to process and not trying to contain it. At 11 minutes and 4 seconds, the automated system completed its cycle. The coupling locked. The atmospheric flush initiated. The secondary seal opened, and the 11 trapped delegates and students came through, supported by the response team. The outer seal opened. Marcus walked out. He coughed twice. His eyes were red. His hands were bleeding from the coupling edge. He was upright and walking under his own strength. The medical team moved toward him immediately, and Marcus let them come. He sat down on the floor of the corridor because his legs were telling him clearly that sitting was a good idea right now, and he had learned to listen to that particular. GNALA medic pressed a treatment pad to his palm. Marcus looked at it. Is everyone out? He asked. Yes, the team lead said. Marcus nodded. He leaned his head back against the wall. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, Virith was standing in front of him. Virith's antennae were doing something that Marcus had not seen before. They were moving in a slow, trembling way, as if Virith was trying to hold them still and could not quite manage it. You were humming? Virith said. Marcus looked up. Yeah, he said. What were you humming? Marcus was quiet for a second. Song from a game I played as a kid, he said. I used to hum it when I was scared. It helped. Virith stared at him. You were scared, Virith said. Of course I was scared, Marcus said. Like it was the most obvious thing in the world, Virith stood there and processed this. The human had walked into a corridor full of lethal compounds alone and bleeding. And scared, and he had stood there for 11 minutes, holding a piece of metal and humming a song from his childhood. Not because he was not afraid, because he was afraid and he went in. Anyway, Virith's antennae moved upward fully. All the way. The Salvari equivalent of something so large it could not be contained. In the corner of the perimeter. Coordinator Reen was sitting on the floor too. Nobody remarked on this. The Sorath Conference issued a formal commendation within the hour. Professor Doesn't Call, who had watched the entire thing from the security feed in her office, sat at her desk afterward, and did not move for a very long time. Then she finished her paper. She was crying while she typed. For Velori this happened perhaps once a century. It happened now. The council chamber of the Galactic Academic Consortium was the kind of room that made you feel small on purpose. It was built that way. The Velori architects who designed it 400 years ago believed that a room where decisions shaped civilizations should remind the people making those decisions of the scale of what they were doing. The ceiling was high enough that the upper portion disappeared into shadow. The seating curved in a wide arc, and the central floor where a speaker stood was open and unprotected, and the light that fell on it came from above, so that whoever stood there stood in something very close to a spotlight. Professor Doesn't Call stood in that light and did not look small. She was 4 centuries old. She had presented research in this chamber before. She had the particular stillness of a very old, very certain thing. She held a single document in her upper hands. The rest of the chamber held 41 delegate seats, and every one of them was filled. The document was titled Preliminary Observations on the Physiological and Psychological Resilience of Homo sapiens, a species. Shaped by perpetual adversity, she began to read. She did not read all of it. The full paper was 260 pages and contained appendices with biological analysis data that would take months to fully review. She read the summary. She described the Veth-spore incident in precise clinical language and watched the delegates absorb it. She described the Verac paste. She described the gash in the rock gully that Marcus had wrapped with a food packet, and the fact that his first concern had been finishing his field notes. She described the gravitational athletic floor and the torn shirt and the continued training. Then she described Section 9-C. She showed the security footage without commentary. The chamber watched it in silence. The haze in the corridor. The figure standing alone with both hands on the coupling. The slow rise and fall of breathing. The moment when he tilted his head back and closed his eyes. The humming that the audio feed had captured as a faint thread of sound moving through the gray air. When the footage ended, the chamber was completely quiet. Then it was not quiet at all. The debate that followed lasted 3 hours and 20 minutes. It was the longest uninterrupted session the council had held in 30 years. 2 distinct positions formed with the speed and firmness of things people had already been thinking for a while, and were now finally saying aloud. The first position was this: humans should be classified as a danger tier species. The exchange program should be terminated immediately. The danger tier classification existed for species whose biological or behavioral profile presented unacceptable risk in shared environments. A creature that could survive Class 3 biological hazards, that could metabolize compounds lethal to all known enrolled species, that could sustain significant trauma and continue functioning. That was not a student. That was a threat wearing a student's face, and the Institute had let 3 of them in. The delegate making this argument was a senior representative from the Seth Confederation. He made it with genuine concern and genuine data, and he was not wrong about any of the individual facts he cited. He was only wrong about what they added up to. The second position was made by a student. This was unusual. Students did not typically address council hearings, but Veroth had requested the floor through proper channels 3 days before the hearing and had been granted 8 minutes because Professor Doesn't Call had supported the request, and the council had learned not to ignore things Professor Doesn't Call supported. Vyrath walked to the center floor and stood in the light. Vyrath was still a student, young by Salvari standards, not politically experienced, not practiced in the formal rhythms of council address. Vyrath stood in the light, and the council looked at them, and Vyrath's antennae were still for a long moment before they began to speak. I filed 5 wellness reports on Marcus Hale, Virith said. The first was after orientation when I learned he had walked through a blizzard for recreation. I thought he was broken. I thought something in him did not understand death the way it should. I thought that was what made him survive things that should have killed him. Virith paused. I was wrong. The chamber was very quiet. I watched him in Section 9C on the security feed. Virith said. I watched the whole 11 minutes. And I saw something that I did not understand at first. Another pause. The footage has audio. Before he walked through the door, I was close enough to hear him through the seal. He was breathing fast. His hands were not steady. He asked once very quietly before he stepped through if the medical team was ready. Virith's antennae moved. He was afraid, Virith said. He was afraid the whole time. He knew what that corridor contained. He had read the same compound analysis we all read. He knew he might not come back out. And he walked in anyway because there were 11 people on the other side of that seal who had 12 minutes of air, and he was the only available? Option. The chamber did not move, the delegate from the Seth Confederation says humans should be classified as a danger tier. Species because they can survive what should kill them, Virith said. I want to ask the chamber a different question. What do you call a creature that is afraid and acts anyway? What do you call a species that evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill it for 4 billion years, and that species learned not to become fearless but to be afraid and move forward anyway? What do you call that? Virith looked at the delegate from the Seth Confederation directly. Because I do not call it a threat, Virith said. I call it the bravest thing I have ever seen. The chamber was quiet for a very long time after Virith finished. The vote was not close. The human exchange program was not terminated. It was expanded. The council issued a formal amendment to the program's charter increasing the number of eligible human students from 3 to 15 per academic cycle. They amended the official consortium classification of Homo sapiens from its original designation of fragile pre-spacefaring civilization to a new classification that had never been used before because the category had never existed before. The new classification was Endurance Class Savant, handle with respect, Professor. Dozenth Call walked out of the council chamber into the corridor and leaned against the wall for a moment. She was 4 centuries old. She had outlived friends and students and colleagues and 2 entire political systems. She thought she had stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. She was surprised now, not by the vote. She had known how the vote would go after Virith spoke. She was surprised by what she felt. Something she had not felt in a very long time. The particular feeling of standing near the edge of something genuinely new. She went back to her office and sent the finalized paper to the consortium's publication archive. Then she sent a copy to Earth's Academic Liaison Office with a personal note attached. The note said simply, "You should be very proud of the creatures you make on that world of yours." On Earth, the report arrived on the desk of Academic Liaison Director Amara Shun on a Wednesday morning. She read the classification amendment first because it was on the cover page. Then she read the summary. Then she read Virovsa's testimony, which had been appended in full. She read it in her office, with the door closed and her morning tea going cold on the desk. When she finished, she sat back in her chair and laughed. She laughed the way you laugh when something is so perfectly and exactly true that your whole body recognizes it before your brain catches up. She laughed until her eyes were wet, and she was not entirely sure at what point the laughing stopped being laughing. Then she forwarded the full document to Marcus. She added one line in the forwarding. Message. She wrote. Read the last page. Marcus received it on his phone. He was sitting in the station's recreational sector on a bench near the 4-trunked alien tree he had noticed on his first day. His shoulder was still slightly stiff from the gravitational training injury. His palm had healed cleanly. The scar on his shin was new enough to still be pink at the edges. He opened the document. He scrolled to the classification amendment. He read the words, Endurance Class Savant, handle. With respect, he read them twice. He looked at the tree for a moment, then he typed a reply back to the entire consortium address that Director Chun had forwarded from. He typed it the way he did everything. Without ceremony. Without performance. With the complete and total naturalness of a person who had never once in his life tried to be more than exactly what he was, he wrote, "Oh, thanks. Also, is Virith coming to Earth for the summer? I want to take them hiking." He sent it across the station in the Salvari residential corridor. Virith's communicator buzzed with a copy of the message. Virith read it. Virith's antennae moved in the full upward, trembling position that had no translation. Virith thought about the hiking. Virith thought about a planet where everything had been trying to kill life for 4 billion years, and life had kept going anyway and had produced this creature who ate toxic paste and called mortal wounds scratches and stood alone in poison corridors humming songs from his childhood because he was afraid and he had people to save, and those two things together were simply what you did, Virith thought. If Marcus Hale survived that planet, then perhaps with him there I would be fine. Virith typed one word back. Yes, and somewhere very far away on a pale blue dot orbiting an unremarkable star, a species that the galaxy had underestimated, continued doing what it had always done. It kept going. It was afraid. It kept going anyway. That was the whole story. That had always been the whole story. The galaxy had just needed a long time and one very ordinary young man eating a protein bar in an alien corridor to finally hear it.